Hey, thank you so much for joining us on the City Rev Life podcast. My name is Pastor Robey Barnes, and we have an incredible guest with us here today. So glad that you joined us on this special episode. I have my good friend joining me here, Pastor Wayne Lomax. And man, Wayne, I was calculating this morning, we've been friends now for over 10 years now. And we actually originally met. So if you're listening and you're part of City Rev Church, our friendship began because Pastor Wayne and at the time it was called The Fountain.
Well, I need a stimulus plan to get some of that money back, but I built it out.
Well, we're still under deliberation.
Yeah, Robey.
The vote hasn't come through.
Glad to be here, man. Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, man. So, hey, just tell us a little before we jump in. We had a conversation a couple weeks ago. We were just kind of did a Zoom call, check in on each other, and we were talking about, finding stability in a time of vulnerability. I love your thoughts are just so rich. I wanted to talk about that a little bit, but just before we jump into that, maybe you can just tell us a little bit about the Fountain of New Life. Tell us about the church.
Yeah, the Fountain Church. We're in Miami Gardens. Been there since December 2009. Transitioned from Pembroke Pines to Miami Gardens, and we're in a community where we have an opportunity to constantly engage people who are in need and people who are seeking something more than what the culture is providing. And so we're challenged with being able to provide that, have a wonderful congregation that's gone through a very challenging transition from Pines to Miami Gardens. And so we know a little bit about instability and discomfort and, not knowing what the next day is going to bring, but we're in a kind of good place. We think before February this year, we thought we were in a good place. So we're in a place right now. So that's right, that's the Fountain. We say we do like two things there. We serve the congregation and the community. So wow, that's what we do.
So just tell us some of the initiatives in the community. We at our church have such a heart for loving on the city, but I love learning from what other churches are doing to meet the needs in the community around them. So just maybe tell us a little bit about what you guys are doing in the community.
Yeah, we do. We have some initiatives that we've been doing for years. We have a partnership with FIU where we are training kids in that community and science, STEM stuff, So it's the medical school at FIU. The medical students come over. They teach them all types of scientific things. And you should come sometime because if you didn't understand what was going on in the science class when you were in junior high, they'll help you understand it now. I say, oh, that's what they were trying to say. And so we do that. And so that's a great outreach program. We also have a community that we've adopted. So it's called Vista Verde. It's kind of it's a challenged community, high need for jobs, educational enrichment and stuff like that. And so we're there once a quarter with a big community gathering, food and games and support programs. And we partner with other community-based organizations to bring services there. But right now we're doing probably our most important work because during this pandemic, we are really partnering with as many people as possible to feed people. It's already started where the hunger issue has already began to creep into people's places. And so people are running out of food. So we're feeding really every week on two different campuses. One of our partners is the Mount Pisgah Seventh-day Adventist Church, and they have a phenomenal food bank. And so we just help them do that. And then we're on our campus one day out of the week. So we alternate Wednesdays. And so we've been able to form some partnerships with National Christian Foundation and the Miami Dolphins and the Sulphur Foundation. They're all donating and we're trying to feed, and it's not enough food to go around. So so that's what we're into right now. Got a group of teenagers, Robey, who we're tasked with nothing but calling senior citizens in the Miami Gardens community to make sure they're doing it. And so that's what they're going to be doing over the next 4 weeks. And we just have a long list of people who are seniors. We just called you to see if you're okay. We know you're sheltering in place. Do you need anything? And so we're taking that data, and if they need food or something else, we try to find the resources to get it to them.
Oh man, I love that. I love the way you're mobilizing the next generation, and that's what I mean. What we know, what we want for our church is that we're reflecting Christ. I mean, Christ met spiritual needs, but he also met physical needs. He fed people, he healed people. He helped the actual physical needs. He dealt with their souls and their bodies. And always love hearing what the Fountain is doing, reaching into the community. And so love that. We love churches that love the city as we do, and are loving on the needy in the city. So love hearing that. And hey, speak to me a little bit about when it comes to finding stability in times of vulnerability. So how are you processing through that? How do you think through that? How do you biblically, spiritually categorize that? Maybe just speak into that a little bit.
Yeah, it's a different place for all of us. I mean, imagine this, if you turn back the clock to Christmas and you're just going out of your house, you go to the mall or, you go to the grocery store and you just go, you just go.
Right.
And then 2 months later, you're 6 feet away from everybody. You're not shaking hands. And now you're wearing masks and protective gear. And so I think for most of us, there's some concern about all of that because the threat is real. And not only is the threat real, the threat is invisible, but we know it's there. And so it kind of reminds us, something the Bible says that the things that are, I think it says something like things that are real are not seen, or something, you're a better Bible student than me, Robey.
No.
But you know the verse I'm referring to,
Yeah.
look not on the things that are seen, but the
Right.
things that are not seen are eternal, or another way of saying that they're real. And so this invisible foe that we have kind of brings to our attention that there are always threats, but we don't always function as though they're always threats. And we become comfortable relying on the things that we see and the things that we have. And so, during this time, we're really in a good classroom. We have an opportunity to learn. And it's interesting you're doing this on Good Friday because, the thing is about Good Friday, it looked like one thing. It looked terrible. And it was painful. It was grueling. It was awful. But when you look back on it, it was something good was happening in the terrible thing that was going on Good Friday. So yeah, I've spent more time. And listen, Robey, you're going to need to help me get a new house because I'm wearing this one out. I haven't been here this much. No, it hasn't been used this much since we've been in here.
I know, man.
But how good is that?
Mm-hmm.
How good is that? That you're having to rethink, okay, we are a family, and families don't just go and come, but families, connect. And so we're finding deeper levels of relationship connections. And so you can find stability in that. Mm. There's a crazy verse in the Bible that says, having food and clothes, let us be content. So, right now you can't buy any more clothes, you can't do any more shopping.
Yeah. And
so we're finding ways to be content with what we have,
Yeah, that is so true. So much in there, Wayne. I love that you're saying we're in the classroom right now. There is so much that we're learning in this moment. And, the classroom is, you have to have the classroom. Like it's indispensable, the classroom, but it's not the playground. The classroom's not always fun. It's usually work. And this is the classroom right now. And learning our dependence. You mentioned something in there that I want to hear more about. You talked about how we're now basically aware. You said something to the effect of, we're basically aware of how vulnerable we always are. Speak about that a little bit.
Well, I mean, life is fragile. Life is not. No matter what we accomplish, I mean, we got gyms. You got LA Fitness and all these different gyms, and we go to these gyms because we're, getting our bodies strong and all this kind of thing. But no matter what we do in the physical context, life is fragile. This little pathogen, that's vulnerable to soap. is vulnerable to soap and water. This little pathogen can wreck our whole existence. But it's not just that, it's all types of things. And so it asks you the question, well, what do you really trust in? What do you really believe in? What are your values? What's most important to you? And so, because there's never a time, honestly, when you're not vulnerable to something that can radically change your life. Man, listen, I'll tell you what happened to me the other day. I have a family in the church who has a 7-year-old daughter that was in a bike accident, had suffered a tremendous head injury. And I'm on the phone with them as they are disconnecting the kid from life support.
Oh my goodness.
And we're talking about a great family. I mean, wonderful family, all kinds of support, layers and layers and layers and layers of support. And so, who would ever think that? I mean, that's the last thing any parent would ever think of. But in reality, the thing is, it happens. And I'm going to use a word, I shouldn't say it like this, but I'm just going to say it this way. Mm-hmm. Kind of comfortable with it until it happens to us. Mm-hmm. Because it does happen. And so there is never a time when we're totally insulated from pain, from disappointment, from hurt, from loss, or from death. We're never insulated from it. And God never promised that. God makes this kind of, interesting promise. I'll be with you. I'll be with you. You won't go through it by yourself. I'm going to be right there. But he never promised you won't go through it.
In fact, he promises it. He says, Peter says, why are you surprised when you go through trials, as if something strange was happening to you?
Yeah. And so nobody wants to go through difficulties, but let me just ask you a question. How many difficult things have you gone through in your life?
Well, none. I mean, Wayne, my life's just charmed. I've just never gone through anything difficult.
Don't get me started over here now.
Okay, all right. I want to get you worked up. No, of course. Yeah, we've all gone through it. We've all gone through difficult things. You're right. Yeah, here's what I hear you saying, and I think this is so helpful, is one of the helpful things in this time of vulnerability is I wonder if it's not as much that suddenly we're vulnerable. It's that we are just aware now of the vulnerability we've always had.
Yes, we're aware. And hopefully it'll help us function differently. There's no guarantee of that. Once the virus is taken care of, you can go back to the parks, you can go on vacation. There's a danger of returning to functioning the way we did, not knowing the neighbor next door, not coming home to be with our families, not caring about people who are putting their lives on the line, like medical people and police officers and firefighters and paramedics who, they do this all the time. They're just ramping it up right now. Not caring about our own personal health. We go back to just being indulgent and sloppy with how we live. And so I think we can learn a lesson, like in the house. You got to eat home. Most of the food you're eating at home, which they say is better. If you have my wife to cook, it's going to be better. Tell you, it's going to be better.
Oh man.
It'll be better for you. And so it's things we may need to pay more attention to, particularly the relationship things. I would tell you what happened to me yesterday. My next door neighbor is Vietnamese family. And so it's several of them live in the community. And so they come over, they kind of gather together at each other's house. So they were taking this big thing out of the house and putting them in the cars. I mean, I didn't know what it was. It's big. And so they were gesturing to me to come. Now I'm social distancing. So I'm saying, not coming, but so close. And so I walked over and he has this big, it's some kind of vegetation, like a big fruit. I don't even know what it was. But he's offering one to me as a gesture of kindness. They're taking them, putting them in their cars, offering one to me because he said you cut it and eat it. But I don't know how to eat it. I didn't know what it was. So, but what I'm saying is that's important when we don't feel vulnerable. And so if we can do it in difficult times, we've got to find ways to connect with people who are right around us when things are much better. So hopefully we'll learn that lesson.
I love that. I was challenged by a group of pastors were meeting with a guy, and they were he's out of Denver. He wrote this book called The Art of Neighboring. Have you ever heard of that book, Wayne?
It's called The Art of Neighboring.
I don't read, but on Sundays.
Oh, come on. If you're listening, that is not true. Wayne Lomax is one of the smartest guys I know. Okay. Anyway, this group of pastors in Denver, they contacted like the leadership in the civic leadership, and they're like, hey, we want to serve. How can we serve? And so they were doing this retreat. They're from all different churches. Like, how can we serve the city? Like, what can we do? And they're asking them, then they bring in the mayor or someone like that. And he's like, well, and the mayor says, well, we were doing some research and we found that if people would just, be good neighbors to each other, then it actually helps the entire the entire city. We did some economic studies, and we did health studies and community studies. So, I mean, I don't know if you guys are open to this, but if you guys could just rally your churches to love your neighbor, that would be good. And the guy leaves the room and they all kind of hang their heads and they're like, I think someone else told us to love our neighbors and said that was pretty important. How come we needed the mayor to come tell us how to love our neighbors? And what's so funny for us in South Florida is the only time we even talk to our neighbors is a hurricane and now like a pandemic, like we rarely even talk to our neighbors. And so I love what you're saying. I mean, there's so many things out of this classroom time to take with us, being active with loving on neighbors, being appreciative and honoring our local heroes who are putting their lives on the line every day. They're not just putting their lives on the line during the pandemic. It's all the time, being more responsible for ourselves and even our environment. Like I find myself, with the paper product shortage around here, I'm not just grabbing a paper towel every time, I'm a little bit more cautious and, being more responsible for our environment, being more responsible for our own personal health, the time with our families. There's so many things walking out of this classroom time that I think can be a benefit. So if someone came to you and said, hey, Pastor Lomax, I'm just struggling to find security. Like there's so much up in the air. The economy's up in the air. My health is up in the air. I'm not sure if I'm going to get sick. I'm not sure if my family's going to get sick. I don't know when the kids are going to go back to school. Like there's just so much. I'm just so unsettled. But I know as a Christian, I know biblically, I'm supposed to have peace and rest in the Lord. What do I do? How would you advise someone in this vulnerable time? How would you advise someone to find that rest and that peace?
Yeah, Robey, that's a great question. Because Christians are not exempt from those feelings of anxiety. I mean, if you lose your job, you've been furloughed, you don't know when you're going back. You don't have a boatload of cash saved up. You maybe have, a month or two, and then that's it. Well, certainly that's going to create some anxiety. So I think, the Bible has a ton of verses in it that talks about don't fear, trust in the Lord with all your heart, be anxious for nothing, take no thought for what you shall eat or drink. But the reason those verses are there is because people were afraid. People were anxious. People were concerned. And so then they didn't know how they were going to manage. So you can't obliterate the feeling of anxiety, but you can make a decision that in the midst of my uncertainty, I'm going to put my faith and trust in something that I cannot see or someone whom I cannot see. I may be a little anxious about it. I'm a little uncertain. I don't know how it's going to work out. I'm a little nervous about how things are going to pan out. But in spite of all of that, I'm still going to trust and put my faith. So I'm going to put my faith in God. And so somebody might ask me, well, what are you going to do? I say, I don't know what I'm going to do. I'm just going to trust God to work it out. God's bigger than my anxiety. It's bigger than my fear. It's my fear is not an impediment to God acting, So, sometimes people say that faith and doubt don't mix. And maybe under some circumstances they don't, but there are times when God's power and love for us transcends our inability to believe. So, I would try to encourage them that, your feelings are valid, and, if you can find a mustard seed size of faith, just a little bit of faith and extend that towards God in the situation. The psalmist says he's a very present help in time of trouble.
That's so good. I love that you are encouraging Christians to not be afraid to acknowledge the reality of their fears. And it's not helpful to someone personally, and it's not helpful to the people around them when they're just like, no, I'm fine. I trust in the Lord. I'm not afraid. Like, be a real breathing human and acknowledge it. And and start with just being authentic with yourself before the Lord.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, it's important. Job's wife, the people in Scripture who show vulnerability take a beating from us. Like Job's wife, nobody likes Job's wife because Job's wife says, man, listen, you still going to church, why don't you just curse God and die? She wasn't talking from a theological perspective. She was talking from an emotional perspective. She just lost 10 kids, 10 kids, 10 funerals, 10 burial plots, 10 caskets, 10 eulogies, 10 empty beds, 10 empty spaces around the Passover meal. 10. So she's not talking theology. She's talking,
Wow.
This is how she's feeling. And on top of that, her husband's lost all of his resources. So her security is gone. Then he gets ill. And so we beat her up as a person who lacks faith. No, she's just expressing the very human response to multiple concurrent calamities.
Wow, you've convicted me. I have a completely new perspective on Job's wife. I've always thought her as a villain, but you're exactly right. I mean, she's doing what they do in the Psalms. I mean, how many of the Psalms start with, God, where are you? Like, why am I alone? When will you wake up and come to my rescue? And then after that, they move to the place of, but I will still trust in you. And they find that mustard seed kernel. And I love you are pushing Christians to be real. And you said, at the beginning of this conversation, you said, we fear the unseen. But you just said, but we can have faith in the one who is unseen. So we have a choice. We can either fear the unseen or have faith in the unseen. We talk about how, well, God's invisible. It's so hard to have faith in him. Well, it's not hard for us to have fear of what could be in the grocery aisle that I can't see. So fear of the unseen comes readily to us. So then why should it be so strange to choose faith in the unseen? And so wow, fear in the unseen or faith in the unseen. If that appears in one of my sermons coming up, Wayne, I'm not giving you credit for it, okay? I'm just going to steal it.
Hey, man, it's yours. It's yours. I did want to say that, that biblical verse that you alluded to where it said, where the psalmist is saying, God, where are you? See, Robey in my translation say, God, where you at? Where you at? Where you at, man?
That's awesome. That's the Wayne Lomax translation right there.
We can't find you. Yeah.
Oh, that's awesome, man. Well, hey, I think it's so helpful to see the reality is we've not suddenly become vulnerable. We have always been vulnerable. We're just suddenly realizing it. And that may seem like, wow, that makes me feel even more scared. Well, actually, that will lay a foundation for our faith. Because if we know that we've always been the same exact amount of vulnerability, then we know God has been just as much with us yesterday as he is today, as he will be tomorrow. And the reality is, if it's my time, then the Lord will take me home, and he'll do it either by coronavirus or a bus or something. If that happens, if it's my time, then the Lord will take me home. In the meantime, and if he does take me home, what does Paul say in Philippians? He says, that's for my gain. In the meantime, I'm going to serve the Lord. And so actually, I think sometimes when we feel vulnerable, we try and rush to, well, I'm not that vulnerable. I'm secure here. I'm secure here. And maybe the opposite would actually really lay a better foundation. Well, I've always been this vulnerable, and I might be even more vulnerable than I realize, because every single time my heart continues beating, every single beat is actually from the Lord. And I'm just as safe now as any time because I'm in the hands of the Lord.
Yes, it's all a gift. It's all a gift.
Yeah. Gift
of grace.
Well, hey, thank you so much for sharing this. For me, I love our conversations, and this particular, when we were talking a little bit about this a couple weeks ago, was really a blessing to me personally, and it's kind of shaped in some ways how I'm processing security in the middle of vulnerability. So, hey, thank you so much for joining us on this episode of City Rev Life, City Rev Life podcast. Pastor Wayne, any last thoughts before we conclude our time here together?
Yeah, well, Pastor Robey, thank you for having me. I appreciate it. It's an honor. Appreciate our friendship. And to all of your viewers and listeners, and those who are believers and those who may not be believers, I just want to encourage you that there's always something greater than the challenge. And the Bible says it's someone, not something, but someone who is greater than the challenge. So the writer of the book of John says, greater is he that is in you than he that is in the world. And so whatever it is that's on the outside of us that's a threat, listen, God's power and presence are always greater. And so I want to encourage you to think about that and embrace that as a way of living your life, and look forward to hearing what more God's going to do with your great church out there.
Awesome, man. Well, hey, great word. That's a good one to end on. Greater is he who is in us than he who is in the world. So, hey, Wayne, love you, man. Thank you so much. Appreciate your friendship. Love what you're doing for our city and through the fountain and the church there. Love you guys. And hey, if you're watching or listening and you want to hear more from Wayne Lomax, I want to encourage you to go to their YouTube channel. You'll get some sermons that are there. Is it the Fountain YouTube channel?
TFC Miami Gardens, the Fountain Church Miami Gardens, TFC Miami Gardens.
The Fountain Church, TFC Miami Gardens on YouTube. You'll hear some of Pastor Wayne's
Facebook. Yeah.
Also on Facebook as well.
Yeah.
Awesome. Hey, thank you so much for joining us on this episode of the City Rev Life podcast. We'll see you next time.
Thank you for joining us on City Rev Life. You can subscribe to this podcast, rate and review wherever you're listening to this. And we love it when you share it with your friends on social media. For more videos and content, go ahead and check us out at cityrev.org/podcast or download our City Rev Church app. Have a great day.